This is Dennis Ramundi. I'm here with my co-host, Phil Goldberg, author of American Veda. Our podcast, Spirit Matters, spiritmatterstalk.com. Our guest today, Mallika Chopra. Mallika is a mom, media entrepreneur, public speaker, and published author. Her most recent book, Living with Intent, My Somewhat Messy Journey to Purpose, Peace, and Joy, was published this past April. Mallika is also the founder of Intent.com. And I want to say I read the book flying out to Boise, Idaho this past weekend, and I enjoyed it very much. Mallika, thank you so very much for taking the time to come on our podcast today.
Thank you. I'm thrilled to be chatting with you.
Mallika, let's begin by asking you what got you interested in intent to the point of starting a website and a blog and now writing a book about it. When did this interest first arise, and what great...
Yeah, well, I've grown up in a family, my dad being Deepak Chopra, where I learned how to meditate when I was 9. But I think another aspect that my dad incorporated into my brother and my daily practice was setting intent. So he used to make us repeat a phrase from the Course in Miracles, which goes like this: I am responsible for what I see. I choose the feelings I experience and set the goals I will achieve. And everything that seems to happen to me, I ask for and receive as I have asked. And my dad would ask my brother and I, what do you ask for? And we'd ask for things like tickets to the Celtics and a trip to Hawaii. And then he would listen and he'd say, okay, but what about asking for love, connection, inspiration, a sense of purpose? So for me, intent is really expression of the qualities in my life, in our lives, to make us feel healthier, happier, more connected, and more purposeful. Very different from goals, which come from the mind. Intents really come from the soul.
Right. Mallika, let me ask you in regard to that. So you have that intention. You also have been somebody that's been practicing meditation for many, many years, like Phil and I, and there's many angles, many approaches on meditation, but one common theme is that it gives you more consciousness. It gives whatever your intent is more strength. Do you see it that way? How do you combine your meditation with your intention, and how does one affect the other?
Yeah, so it's a great point. I actually had an interesting conversation even with my dad this past weekend, just about, when we meditate, we kind of connect more to consciousness and to spirit, and we plant these seeds. And it's really the process of being honest and authentic and discovering, what our deepest desires are. And from them, kind of putting it in that fertile ground. I call that first phase on the path to intent, which I outline in my book, the incubation phase. Mm-hmm. And I really think intents are like seeds. We plant them, we put, often then we put dirt, we let the sun and the water nurture them, not even necessarily knowing the beautiful tree or flower it's going to blossom into, but have trust that, the universe is going to support us in that journey. So I do think intents, when we combine it with our meditation practice, we're really seeding them in a rich place of connection.
Mallika, I want to go back to something you said earlier, because it's a very important question. When you moved from New England to California, did the intent to have Laker tickets replace the Celtic ticket?
It's such a good question, believe it or not, because no, I'm not such a huge sports fan, but my brother is an obsessive New England sports fan, and that's like all the work he does. And a few years ago, he had the opportunity to do a documentary for Kobe Bryant.
Yes.
Which is on Showtime. And my brother really struggled with it. And he never let up his Celtics fervor, being with Kobe basically 24/7 for a year.
Well, I'm a Knicks fan, and I've suffered 4 years. So go ahead, Phil.
I want to, on a more serious note, go back to Dennis's question about this interaction between intent and meditation practice. You sounded like you agree that meditation practice would be a strengthening factor in setting intent and carrying out intent. What about the opposite? What about the intent and how intent influences meditation?
Absolutely. So, and I talk about this in my book. I've been a meditator for 35 years, but I am the first to admit that I am also an irregular meditator. And so part of my journey with the book was actually setting the intent to recommit to my meditation practice.
Right.
And, I have found your earlier question also was, starting intent.com and my website. I found that when we express our intents, when we start to create community to support our deepest desires. And so actually my community also really helped me, feel empowered and connected and wanting to continue that meditation practice on a regular basis, which does take discipline.
I also wanted to ask you, Mallika, about, in the book you mentioned Eckhart Tolle and your discussions with him in regard to intention. What is it that he said, and how did that affect your thinking in regard to it?
So I recently, about a month ago, and I have it's up now, I did a TEDx San Diego talk on going to meet Eckhart Tolle, which the whole going to meet him in and of itself was a fascinating experience. Mm-hmm. But when we sat together, there were two things, and my talk is more about just letting go and listening to the bells with him and kind of letting go of my goal-driven agenda. But at one point, we were talking about living with intent and the concept of dharma, which I grew up with, that we all have a unique purpose in life and how can we serve. And he started to talk to me about how the universe can serve through us. And I actually told him that was something that really stressed me out, because I felt this pressure to always do something grand or serve in a certain way. And he responded with something which is really beautiful for me and resonated with me. I said, I just feel like a soccer mom. All I do is I drive my kids around from one activity to the other. And he said it's the frequency holders, the everyday people who are doing extraordinary things, who are raising the frequency of this planet. And, there's nothing more important that you can do at this stage in your life, but do it with love and do it with purpose and presence and connection. And in that way, you will be serving in the way that you're meant to right now. It was beautiful.
Mallika, you mentioned the word dharma, which is actually one of my questions I was going to ask you, was having been raised by Deepak and Rita Chopra, and having that heritage of the Hindu Dharma, how much that affected your life. But to bring it into the realm of intent, there's a Sanskrit word, sankalpa, which is often translated as intention. It has this connotation of an inner vow or resolve or willpower and that sort of thing. Was that part of your upbringing as well? Did the concept sankalpa come into it?
It did, but not as much. I think in our family, we were obviously very spiritual, but we weren't religious per se, and on a daily basis, it's so funny, we never think of ourselves as even really that spiritual, but I do think the practice and the discipline, well, I wouldn't even use the word discipline. I think the trust in the practice was something that was definitely, that it wasn't even required discipline. It was more, it required trust. So I think in that capacity, yes, it did play a role.
Good. Mallika, one of the things that struck me in your book that I really, really enjoyed, a lot of times you read a book about, from somebody, especially if they have a long-term meditation background, it's about how smooth their life is and how your life can be so smooth and wonderful. Also, you were amazingly honest about, just day-to-day stuff and how things stress you out and finishing your MBA and you had a close friend battling cancer, and how you, like all of us, go through the stresses and strains of daily living and how they affect you, but how you utilize different tools like meditation to deal with that. Um, Talk to us, our listeners, a little bit about that. About you come from an amazing background. Your father being Deepak Chopra, but you're dealing with the same stuff we're all dealing with. But I guess along the way you've picked up many tools to deal with it.
Yeah, it's so funny because so many people are really surprised that one, I deal with the same issues that everyone else deals with, and they're also surprised, which surprises me, that like people say, "Oh my God, it must have taken so much to be so honest." And honestly, I think maybe my intent is to break away the mystery and the mythology that comes with whether it's my name or other people's names, because I think we're all, and that's why I called it the messy journey. I feel we all kind of have different journeys. Sometimes we feel like we're on the path and everything makes sense, and we feel aligned with our purpose, and we're doing our practice as we're supposed to be doing or want to be doing. And then other times, we just kind of fall off the path. And so maybe I can help people feel like that's okay to realize that even I, struggle a lot with all the same issues that everyone else struggles with.
Well, it helped me very much because I've been involved in meditation for many years, and of course some days are great and other days aren't so great, and there's ups and downs and all. But having that tool is also wonderful. Phil?
Yeah, it's a very interesting point in people's spiritual lives when they take up a practice like meditation, or they get into yoga, or they find their guru, or whatever it is. There's a sense people adopt that everything will be really great from now on, and better and better and better and better. And sometimes spiritual teachers actually encourage that kind of thinking, and then it's a shock sometimes when we go through the usual struggles and craziness of life. And I was curious whether you were spared some of that because you had famous people coming in and out of your life, the kind of people we look up to and think, oh, their lives are perfect, and you probably had glimpses of the reality that, no, not necessarily the case.
Absolutely. My brother did a documentary on my father called Decoding Deepak, and my dad was 100% supportive of that, and opened up so much in that. But I think part of that was actually shedding light on that my dad's like a normal person, and we did grow up with extraordinary people around us, not just teachers, but also well-known celebrities. And I think one of the things that we always saw was that people are people, and all people struggle with different things. And people like my father and others in that world, are great teachers, and they are able to help people resolve some of the things in their life, but they also have their struggles. So, yeah, I think we just had a very practical approach, even in our own life, to be more self-forgiving and to realize that there's a mythology and then there's the reality. And the mythology is fine because that helps people as well, but not to get swayed by the mythology.
Right. Mallika, in your book, and I'll mention the name again, Living with Intent, My Somewhat Messy Journey to Purpose, Peace, and Joy. And I, as I mentioned before, I read that book this past weekend. I enjoyed it very much. You mentioned that obviously when you were young, you grew up around Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, who was your father's teacher for many years, and then you mentioned you spent time around Amma, also known as Amaji, the hugging saint, and that there's a certain joy and wonderfulness about being in those environments. But what is there an aspect to a guru-centric movement that one has to be careful about, that one's not swept up in a personality cult or something along those lines?
It's a great and a difficult question, because one thing I've realized in my life is you never know what anyone else's story is. And so people find what they need at different stages in their life. And I think I talked about in the book going to meet Amma, who I truly think is kind of a saint, and I know hundreds of people who go to her and people who are very close to me. But I was kind of going to look for some solution in my life. And while sitting there, I realized, for me, that wasn't the path, that it had to come from inside. And so I think we all find the teachers that we need to at different stages. But as we just talked about before, I do think we need to be careful not to get lost in the mythology of creating, kind of gods and heroes out of people, because all of those people, and most of those people, I think, also are pretty authentic about who they are if people are willing to listen. So it was very interesting. There was a lot of pushback on my brother's documentary, and people were really upset, a lot of my dad's fans, because they wanted my dad to be something that they had created, which isn't necessarily who he is.
And it's to his credit that he was happy to break those illusions on film.
And it wasn't absolutely comfortable for him. I think he'll be the first one to say that. But yeah, I think both my brother and I actually had so much more appreciation for my dad that he was willing to do that.
Speaking of your family, you're of Indian descent. You're first generation, essentially. You and your brother grew up here. But in your book, you talk about going back to see your family in India. And that experience of straddling two different cultures and two different worlds is a very American one in the early generations of immigrants. And the Indian version of it is unique. Now, I have to say, I had the pleasure in 2001, a really great pleasure, of meeting your grandfather in Delhi, your dad's dad. Yeah. And so you have that strong family connection from, at least on your dad's side, a prominent Indian family, and then here. Growing up, or in the course of your life, was there any tension between that Indian culture and American culture? Is there anything in you that wants to hold on to certain things as you raise children in America and that sort of thing?
It's a good question, because I think a lot of first-generation Indian Americans that I know struggled a lot with their identity, actually, whether to be more American or Indian or, et cetera. I think in my family we had a unique situation because of the work that my dad did, or because of the connection to India. There was never any doubt. We were American and we were Indian, and I was always kind of fine being both, and very comfortable being both. We came from a family which obviously did not try to assimilate into the larger culture, so I think that just shaped who we became. And because we came from such a close-knit family in India and visited every year, for me it always felt very natural to be of both worlds. It's interesting for me because now as a mom and living here, and my kids being second generation, I have continued. I ended up marrying someone from India, so just technically we go to India every year because my in-laws are there, and so my kids have a similar experience. But my nephew, my brother's son, is half Indian and half Chinese. Yeah. But they also have really made an effort to keep him connected to both cultures. And I think our world is changing. The dynamics of just who we are as people and, mixing cultures and a global society, I hope, is going to be, especially for my family, because we do have that in our family, is going to be more tolerant and understanding of just the mix of so many cultures, and not always trying to assimilate, but to celebrate diversity.
Great. Mallika, in the book, you talk about your first meeting with Marianne Williamson, how you were nervous about meeting her, and how you were preparing desperately at the last minute. And I think you even mentioned how you had an exercise where you raised your hands in the air and you took deep breaths and you went in and had that meeting, which I thought was interesting, how you prepared for a situation that might be for you intimidating or stressful. Tell me about Marianne and her influence on you.
So Marianne, it is funny because I've grown up with all of these people. I mean, I think Marianne's known me since I was like 14 or 15 years old. But I think I'm always so in awe of her. So, I definitely have seen her as kind of someone, if I had to think of the women in my life who I put in that top tier of role models, she's one of them. So I was definitely intimidated to go meet her in the context of, interviewing her for my book and whatnot. So like with Eckhart Tolle and others, I, prepared like crazy, reading all the books and writing notes, and I'd have to kind of, deal with my own, like going in. But every single meeting I had, which was amazing, including Marianne, ended up being completely different from what I prepared for and thought it would be. And so with Marianne, it ended up just being, she was in the midst of running for Congress at that time. And we ended up, though, speaking so much about motherhood and being present for my kids in a way that helped alleviate a lot of the struggles that I was having. And so our conversation, and the other thing she really stressed, that conversation was community and what it means to support one another. Mm-hmm. And she talked a lot about that, both in her role as a mother and being able to pursue the career that she had. And I loved what she said, because the first thing we talked about was she was laughing at, my dad is always kind of so like surprised that I get stressed out. And she laughed because she said, yeah, obviously, because your dad had your mom who was at home watching the kids, and your dad could fly around everywhere. And she was blunt and honest that way. It was awesome. And so, I felt like she could really relate to so many of kind of the questions that I have. And she honestly is brilliant. Like, she's such an amazing person.
Well, let's take the opportunity to plug our interview with Marianne Williamson on Spirit Matters, so people can go there after they hear this interview. Mallika, let's get back to your book, Living with Intent. You break it down into a kind of steps.
Yep.
I'll read them. Incubate, notice, trust, express, nurture, take action. Could you go over those and explain why you chose those steps and what they mean?
Sure. Yeah, no, thank you. I think I've learned, being around a lot of authors and teachers, that acronyms or steps help. So I had spent many years actually thinking about these steps.
I just realized it's an acronym.
Yes.
Yeah.
Very good.
We're a little bit slow on this end, Mallika.
So INTENT. And so I spent years thinking about what the right acronyms were, and also what I call the path to intent, even though I see it as a circular, not a linear path.
Yeah.
So I, for Incubate, really was about recommitting to my meditation practice, to honoring silence, to honoring actually the infinite possibilities that come in our life, and that idea of, seeding something, because I see sometimes we don't even know what we want, and we need to take the time to explore that. So that was Incubate. N is for Notice, which is noticing our internal dialogue. I realized that my language was often full of words like, I'm tired, I'm guilty, I'm stressed, I'm overwhelmed. And if that was what I'm saying to myself all the time, that was my reality as well as noticing the people, places, and circumstances that we find ourselves in every day, but often don't even notice, can help us on our journey. So the idea of synchrodestiny that my dad talks about. T is for trust, which is trusting our intuition, trusting that the universe is there to support us. E is for express, because I do feel like at the right time we need to express what we want, take ownership of it, and really formally plant that seed and say, this is important to me, which leads to nurture, which is nurturing our community and people who support us, but also nurturing ourselves so that we can serve. And then finally, T is for take action. You both also, I've grown up in this self-help world, and often people say, oh, we'll just set the intent and the universe will take care of the details. And actually, I'm not really of that ilk. I believe that we really need to pay attention and take action with smart goals. But when we do everything else, action becomes much easier. And so there is a time for really taking action.
Mallika, you also write about gratitude and research that's been done on gratitude and its effects on a human being's health. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like in the news, if you read every single day now, there seems to be some new study coming out on gratitude. And it's interesting. We all have been meditating for many years, and now meditation even is, so in vogue, and it's so different from the days when my dad and others started speaking about it, and he was the East Asian witch doctor who sold snake oil. Now, it's so mainstream. So I think with gratitude as well, we're seeing so many of the benefits that it has, whether it's in terms of empathy or even health results. And so as a mom, that is something that I really try to incorporate into our daily life at home. And so many of these practices, which I think I tried to share in the book, they're not rocket science. They're simple things that we can do every day, that really small steps that have huge impact. So just expressing gratitude has that effect on our daily lives.
Great advice. Yep.
When you say express gratitude, are you suggesting, as some people do, a regular exercise, like people say to write down in the morning or in the evening the things you're grateful for, or do you just mean it in a more casual way? Do you mean it as expressing it to other people, or all of the above, or what?
I think, again, it's a good question because I think it really depends on the person. I think one of the things I've realized in my own life is that if I try to do too many things every day, I get totally stressed out.
Right.
So
then you have to set the intention to do it differently.
Exactly. So I think you have to find what works for you. What I try to do just personally is at the end of my meditations, I try to spend, just put my attention on my heart at the end of the meditation, think about what I'm grateful for today. And for me, then, I kind of set the intent for the day, and that's what I do. But I also, with my kids, and I think I shared in the book, like my cousin does something where every day at dinner, she and her daughters share what they're grateful for, and I think that's really nice because to do that as a family can be very powerful as well.
Great. Again, I wanted to bring out something in regard to your book, and that is one of the reasons I mentioned this before, and I really enjoyed it, was because you were so honest about yourself. And so many times when I read stuff in regard to self-help, there are people that are writing, you don't get a sense of who they are, if they're actually walking their walk. And I certainly got that when I read your book about you. And I also wanted to tell a little story and about your dad and why he's a guy that I think walks his talk, because several years ago, this is happened directly with me, my mother was diagnosed with breast cancer. And your father had just become pretty well known. His first book or second book was out. And I didn't know him from a hole in a wall, and he didn't know me. And I thought, well, he knows a lot about Ayurveda. Let me call his office and see if there's somebody there that'll talk to me or give me some advice or whatever. So I called his office. I got a nurse. The next thing I knew, Deepak Chopra was on the phone with me and very much giving me his attention, asking me questions, giving me advice. I couldn't get my local doctor on the line, but here was your dad on the line with me. And then he wrote me a beautiful letter, which I still have, giving me advice, all the steps. He asked me to write him back, and we corresponded back and forth like that. And I was so touched and moved by that. So, and please thank him for me. I never got the chance to thank him.
Yeah, no, that's a great story.
That to me is what's important. That we can have all this talk, but how does it translate into what we do in our daily lives? And this is something that Marianne Williamson also discussed at great length when we interviewed her, and in other talks that I've had with her. So please pass along that thank you. And I think you also brought that feeling across in your book about being a real person and using this spiritual development to actually engage and encounter and help other people.
Oh, thank you. That's such a great story. And I think, again, as you pointed out, whether it's Marianne or my father, having been exposed to so many great teachers and thinkers in my life, I think what I have found, even actually frankly amongst entertainers and politicians, I've actually found that the people who are most successful actually are often also the most honest and giving, and not trying to portray something necessarily that they're not. And I found that that's just an interesting dynamic.
Phil?
Marianne is a great example of that as well.
Mallika, it just occurred to me to ask this question a little out of order here. But I was asking you about the mixed heritage, or not mixed heritage, but the America-India link. And when I was reading your book, I took notice of the names of your children.
Yeah.
And I wonder if you could mention them and for posterity, but also why the choice of names and what they mean.
Yeah, so, we, in our tradition in India, all names have meaning, and so we put a lot of importance, and in fact, in many ways, I think the name creates the form, like intention does. So we had this thing where my husband and I wanted to choose names, but we really wanted both sets of parents to also feel good about them. So with Tara, my elder daughter, Tara was the name of the Buddha's mother. And so we loved that, it had that meaning and representation, and, just represented compassion and light. Tara means a star as well. So that was that. And then with my second daughter, it was funny, we struggled with names, because every name that we'd come up with, someone or the other would not feel great about, because we had to please all the parents as well. And so, but when one day my husband, me, and my mom were just sitting, and I suddenly thought of the name Leela, and Leela means the play of the universe. And immediately, it just, everybody felt that was such a wonderful name. And so I really loved my daughter's name. So they really have manifested, their personalities are also aligned with the name, which is interesting.
Mallika, thank you so very much. Any final words you'd like to share with us? Any final questions or points, Phil?
No, I am, again, so grateful. Thank you both for taking the time to read the book and to chat about the book, and just honored to participate in this conversation.
Thank you very much for taking the time, Mallika. It's a pleasure.
Great. Thank you. All the best.
Thank you. Bye.